There's an image I'm desperately trying to get out of my mind. From time to time, that image still manages to resurface, and I can see the horrible face of that thing again. In those moments, my limbs freeze, and I feel my throat tighten as the memories rush in to haunt me. No matter how hard I try to forget, I can't erase the memory of the pure evil I encountered. I raised my children alone because my wife died. In a car accident, she was hit by a drunk driver who had just run a red light. At that time, my daughter Elizabeth was 7 years old and my son Nicholas was 4. And to this day, the greatest challenge I've ever faced was having to tell them that their mother would not be coming back. Even the day after her funeral, they were looking for her in the house, expecting her to pop out from behind a curtain as if she had just been playing hide and seek. I think it was because they were very young and their minds couldn't process the loss of their mother. At that moment, it was like they just didn't want to believe it. After receiving the life insurance money, I decided that we needed to move to a different part of the city. I wanted the kids to keep going to the same school and be able to keep their friends. But I couldn't stand all the memories of the many moments we had lived in that house. Not a night went by without me crying until I fell asleep lying on my wife's side of the bed, which was now empty. It took several months, but we eventually got used to the situation. While he played in the garden, I would find myself gazing at my wife's portrait on the mantelpiece. I'd smile, tears streaming down my face, no longer crying from sadness, but happiness. Because I had finally accepted the fact that she was in a better place, and that our lives would change and gradually get better. Except that everything really changed the day I saw that thing behind our house. When we moved, I found a house that was located on the outskirts of the city. It was in a cul-de-sac, right across from one of my children's friends' houses. So it was a perfect place for them, but also for me, because I needed to be a little bit isolated. I still invited friends over for drinks occasionally, but I have to admit that I loved sitting alone on the porch overlooking the garden, watching the birds fly away from the surrounding trees. Trees that stretched as far as the eye could see, and made me feel like the master of a gigantic estate that began in the garden. But one day, as I was sitting in my chair, a bottle of beer in one hand and a book in the other, I heard Elizabeth, my daughter, calling me from the end of the garden. When I asked her what she wanted, she turned to me, her eyes wide open. She pointed her finger with a trembling hand toward the forest. I squinted to try to see what she was showing me, but I didn't see anything. I then put down my beer and my book and crossed the yard to join my daughter. I put my hand on her shoulder before taking her in my arms to comfort her as best I could. "Why are you so scared, sweetheart? Did you see a fox or something like that?" With her arm still around me, she was shaking violently and kept pointing with her finger. I glanced in the direction she was pointing until my eyes stopped on a large oak tree that was about 2 meters from where we were standing. The scattered leaves on its branches had changed color, and most of them had fallen, accumulating around the trunk. Beneath the roots that stretched into the ground, I spotted a hole. I had seen this tree before, but I had never noticed that an animal lived underneath. "My dear, I can't help you if you don't tell me what's wrong, so I'm going to ask you again. What did you see?" Elizabeth took a deep breath and answered in a trembling voice, "That." I looked again toward the big oak tree and saw a hand covered in grey skin coming out of the hole underneath it. Long fingers topped with yellow nails were scratching deeply at the earth. And suddenly, I heard the thing to which the hand belonged let out a deep cry as it pulled itself out of the hole. As its limbs became clearer and clearer, I noticed how frail that thing was. I saw its thin muscles contract under its pale skin in a final effort to get out of the hole. The disgusting creature then lifted its head toward the bright light of the autumn sun, and I was able to see its face for the first time. Its eyes were sunken into their sockets, and its cheeks seemed hollowed, to the point that its skin looked stretched tight against the bones of its skull. The whites of its eyes were streaked with red veins that would disappear from time to time when its half-torn eyelids closed. Greasy strands of grey hair hung down on each side of its face and over the back of its neck. The vertebrae of its spine pressed against its skin as if they were about to pierce through it. It was almost grotesque when the creature moved. I stood still, completely shocked. I could no longer hear the birds singing or even the wind blowing through the branches of the trees. The only sound I could hear was its weak, raspy breathing coming from its throat like a croak. Elizabeth was gripping my t-shirt tightly. I could feel her trembling, as if she was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her. And suddenly my ears were filled with a piercing scream coming straight from the creature's body. As the thing kept screaming, its body started moving violently, and its limbs began flailing in a supernatural way. To this day, I still don't know what made me grab my daughter and run. But I'm grateful that something managed to snap me out of my stupor. I ran so fast that I made it inside the house in just a few seconds. Then I closed the door behind me. I locked my windows as well, keeping my eyes fixed on the thing that was now crawling across the grass in our yard. I yelled to my daughter to retrieve the rifle from my bedroom. She returned swiftly, the weapon tightly held in her small hands. I grabbed it and took off the safety. I aimed at the creature, ready to empty my magazine into it. While I stayed on guard, I told my daughter to call the police and ask them to send officers. 2 police cars arrived within 10 minutes. And the fact that the police station was nearby was one of the reasons why I chose this house. As I followed 2 officers to the end of my garden, all 3 of us had our weapons drawn, while one of their colleagues stayed with my daughter, even though they approached the tree without much hesitation. I kept my distance because I knew what was in that hole. Their weapon aimed at the gaping cavity. One of them took out his flashlight. He then pointed it toward the darkness. And when they looked inside, they found nothing. They inspected every inch of the burrow with the flashlight, but there was nothing inside. Not a single trace of the thing that Elizabeth and I had seen. I started to panic, thinking they would believe I was trying to play a bad joke on them. However, they simply told me to keep an eye out and stay cautious in case the creature came back. And that, if that was the case, I should call them immediately. They also recommended that I keep a camera with me so I could film the thing if it came back. And after reassuring my daughter, they left. I'm convinced that the reason they didn't ask any questions was because they remembered that my wife had died a few months earlier. They likely believed I was still grieving, and this was just a manifestation of that. 4 years went by without me seeing that thing again, and when it unfortunately reappeared, it was in a dramatic way. My daughter had just turned 11, and I had allowed her to invite some friends over for a sleepover so that she and her friends could feel comfortable. I had taken the trouble to push all the living room furniture to one side so they would have enough space to lay out their sleeping bags. I told Elizabeth that I preferred she sleep inside because some people had reported seeing coyotes in the area. But I knew she didn't believe me, and that she knew exactly why I didn't want her to stay alone with her friends in our yard. And she had no objection to it. While I spent the night with my son Nicholas watching movies, I occasionally heard the girls laughing and chatting happily. After the last movie ended, I put Nicholas to bed, and then I poked my head through the living room door to check that the girls were okay. They were all sleeping and had arranged themselves so that there was a lantern at their feet. I myself, tired, went up to my room and fell asleep. I don't know how much time had passed before I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass and my little girl's scream. Instinctively, I grabbed my rifle and ran down the stairs. When I got to the living room, I noticed that all the sleeping bags were empty. All the girls were huddled together in a corner of the room, their lantern beside them, all of them except my daughter.
Elizabeth, what the hell happened?
Theirs? I shouted, looking at the broken window. But I didn't get any answer. It looked like it had been broken from the outside. I turned back to the girls, who were huddled in the corner, and I saw that they were all pointing toward the window. At the same moment, I was overwhelmed by a sense of imminent danger. I felt like throwing up, and my mind quickly came to the conclusion that the thing was back. I ran as fast as I could to the back door and opened it. As I sprinted through the yard, I shouted to Phil to call the police. My bare feet pounded heavily on the ground as I rushed toward the edge of the forest. When I finally got there, I felt the bottom of my pants was soaked and full of mud. I cupped my hands around my mouth to shout my daughter's name, and the only answer I got was the echo of my trembling voice. I took a deep breath and was about to shout her name again, but I was stopped short, crawling under a bush just a few meters away from me. I saw the face I hadn't seen in years, illuminated by the rays of the moon. I saw him dig his claws into the ground to fully emerge from under the bush. With every movement he made, I could hear his bones cracking ominously. This creature had taken my daughter, and there was only one thing I wanted: to catch it, strangle it, and watch the life slowly drain from its eyes. The only problem was that I couldn't do it. No matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't move anymore. Compared to the hatred I felt for that beast, my fear took over and kept me from making a move. Slowly, its mouth opened to reveal sharp teeth stained with a brown substance. The creature let out a deep breath, which filled the air around me with a horrible smell of rot and decay. I wanted to pinch my nose, but even that I couldn't do. And then, the creature started making a strange noise. It sounded like it was rumbling deep inside its belly. And the sound slowly rose, until the monstrosity let out a deep croak. The sound grew louder and louder, until it reached such a high and sharp pitch that I thought my eardrums were going to burst. I finally managed to move and put my hands over my ears and close my eyes. But even so, I felt like the sound was resonating inside my head. When the thing finally stopped screaming, I lowered my hands and opened my eyes again. The creature had disappeared. There was no trace of its presence. The ground where that thing had crawled earlier was completely spotless. I kept staring at the ground, and I don't know how long I stood there. It took 3 police officers to bring me back to reality. When I was finally able to look away from where the beast had been, I screamed. I fell to my knees and cried with all my strength. I punched the ground and tore out clumps of grass. I expected the officers to try to pick me up, but they let me go on. It was about a week before they found his body. My little girl's body was found a kilometer from our house, well hidden in the forest. Even though I couldn't go there to see the crime scene, the police gave me a description. They found her under a thin layer of dried leaves, her clothes completely torn. Apparently, my little girl had been tortured by that monster. Her funeral was one of the most difficult days of my life. While everyone was crying in the freezing November rain, I remained silent and impassive. As I looked at her small coffin, the despair I felt didn't allow me to cry. No matter how much I wanted to, I just couldn't do it. My eyes were as dry as my heart and my soul. On each of his birthdays, I always visit his grave. And I only do it on that day because it always hurts me deeply to see his name engraved on grey stone. There isn't a single photo of her anywhere in my house. Seeing her, even in a photo, brings me to my knees and makes me cry my heart out. I still have photos of my wife, but it's not the same thing. Because when the man who killed her was sentenced to life in prison, I was able to grieve. But with Elizabeth it was different. The creature that attacked her was still at large. The thing that killed her was still crawling in the woods. The photos of Elizabeth are carefully stored in a box in the attic. Until I find that thing again, I don't think I could bear to see her face. I feel like I abandoned him by not being able to kill that thing that night. My fear got the better of me, and it still haunts me today. I'm not sure I can stop that thing on my own, but I'll do my best. Nicholas is grown up now. He went to university and got his degree in mechanical engineering. Soon after that, he found a girlfriend and married her. They had a child a few years later, and to this day, I don't let my little girl, who was named Elizabeth in honor of my daughter, come visit me. I'm afraid it might return if she visits me. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I feel like I hear something coming from the woods. A light but persistent sound that sounds exactly like the noise that horrible thing was making.